So
Okay.
there we go.
How are you doing?
Good. Can you hear me?
Perfect. Thank you so very much.
Good. Everything does not look like a bad hair day. It looks now.
So
I look like Gandalf the Great, but prior to that, it was completely acceptable.
reasonable. Yeah, we are just past 1 year without a haircut. So
Excellent. Yeah, my wife's
How are
been
you?
doing fine. I actually like it. So
well, I wish I could have done what George Clooney did and just gone with the Flowbee, but
Mhm.
I don't know if you saw that bit, but he's been cutting his hair with Flowbee for like 20 years or something, which is very funny.
Yeah, he's George Clooney, so I don't think it matters.
I don't think it does. I do not. Good. Well, we're going to get underway. I'll start with the traditional sort of 12 o'clock cut for podcast intro to hopefully save some post later.
Mhm.
But we're all set up. And then what do you call it? Once we get through the intros and stuff, I'll switch it to featured speaker focus. So,
Okay. And is this going live, or this is just your recording tool?
oh no, this is going live right now to Facebook and YouTube. And unfortunately, LinkedIn, I've now been waiting like 4 months to get approved by LinkedIn.
Okay.
So,
And then you'll edit it down later to
yes.
the sound bites and publish those. Okay,
Yeah.
good.
Yeah, part of the thing is that the on-demand content, as you may have seen yourself, it's really hard to go through 12 hours of video at the end of the week for everything you missed. So being able to, distill it and contextualize it into snack-sized bites, I think is really important. And it's a changing nature of digital media for us now. So anyways, lots of new lessons to come for this new world and the new way people are behaving within it.
Oh, I should change my background. I had it set up for a guy from France with a French artist. I have to switch out my art.
Aha.
Go back to my.
Hey, Michael, are you 7'4" tall, or is that just the short ceiling?
Now you figured out the secret of my space. I am actually in what really amounts to an underground bunker. I'm in a big box. So if you look over there, that is ground level. That sort of here is the foundation of the house. So this was all built. You know, it's crooked. This was all built at the beginning of the COVID thing to create a workspace.
Yep.
But it really only functions if I'm sitting down. If I stand up, the illusion becomes very Winchester Mystery House.
Well, I'd have to ask you about your MBA career, but we'll talk about the MBA more in a couple of minutes. Let me go ahead and get a quick pause for about 10 seconds, and I'll cut in with the intro, and we can get underway. Thank you, everyone who's joining us already. Let's see here. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you might be joining us from around the world. My name is Chris Heuer with Remotely, and I'm really excited today to be joined by Michael Peachey from RingCentral to talk about some research they recently did on is remote work sustainable. Michael, welcome so much for joining us today.
Hi, Chris. Thanks a lot for having me.
So I was really excited when Jeremiah Ouyang showed us the research you guys had done and seeing all the studies. And in fact, it's one of the key things that I've been trying to do is gather the research and put it into a place where the people who are trying to advocate for remote work can actually distill the data, contextualize it, and figure out how to present it to the leadership to ensure that we can move forward properly. And I think that your research becomes one of the cornerstones of that because it hits on something I've been hearing about for a long time, but we haven't seen the evidence for. So let me just jump right to the point and we'll have a deep discussion about it. But people are worried. Are we going back to the office? How are we going back? How do we go back safely? Other people are worried they're not going to be able to continue to work remotely. So let's cut to the chase. Is remote work sustainable?
I think remote work is here to stay. So whether or not it's sustainable, I think is not actually the question. Right? It's going to be about how do people thrive in this new environment. Roughly March of 2020, most of the knowledge workers in the world were sent home all of a sudden without a lot of warning, without a lot of practice. And we've had to figure it out since then. Every time I hear somebody say, oh, it's going to go back to the way it was. We've got a vaccine. Something else has changed. And I think, no, that bell has rung. There is no going back. There's only going forward. And I think it's going to be a really exciting time where people continue to evolve and improve.
Yeah, excellent. And actually, I think that's the key. And there's so many people right now. I think one of the most interesting things was an understanding. Well, first of all, why don't we talk a little bit about the study before I get into kind of revealing
Sure.
some of the inner secrets of it? And I completely agree with you. And there's a lot of other things that go into it too. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. So why did you guys start this study, and what were you hoping to find?
Sure. So Ring Central, for anybody who doesn't know, we build and market and distribute tools that help people collaborate at a distance. So we've got team messaging products, we've got video communication products, and screen share, and telephony, and task management, and calendar management, and all of those things that you need to use to get stuff done. Um, Prior to the pandemic, we sold into organizations and individuals who were trying to be successful collaborating. With the pandemic, our mission became even more critical and urgent and important. So the more we as an organization understand what does it mean to work from anywhere, the better we can be at designing and building our products, which is near and dear to me as the head of our user experience team. And that's the service. That's what we do for the world. That's the good that we bring. How do people collaborate remotely? If we understand that, we do better.
Yeah, and so as you get into it, it's really fascinating that one of the things is that a lot of people didn't actually necessarily change how they were working with one another. They just simply did it from different locations. Is that fairly true? And what did your study actually produce in looking at that, and relative to how many people have actually done things differently as a result of this shift this past year?
Sure. So what we did is we looked at a little more than 4,000 knowledge workers spread across 4 countries. We wanted to control for some diversity there and get a large enough population. And we approached it with a hypothesis that said, in this new work from anywhere world, some people are thriving and some people are not. And what can we do to understand and learn from those who are thriving to be prescriptive to those who are not? And we really think about 3 levels in there, right? There's the individual knowledge worker, there's the team lead, the manager, whoever's trying to support and get the most out of that team, and then the organizations that they work for. And we can see winners and losers, strugglers and thrivers at all of those levels. And the main point that we learned is that those people that feel connected, and it's about feeling, it's about that social and emotional connection, they're thriving and their organizations are thriving, versus those who feel disconnected.
So what it comes down to, though, is those who already kind of had that sort of good culture where the employees were engaged tended to do better, and those who didn't tend to be struggling. Is that correct?
Partly. So if you were in an organization that had already had a fair amount of remote work or distributed work going on, you had time to develop good habits, to bring in the tools that people needed to collaborate at a distance. So just a personal example, my global user experience team has got people in Xiamen, China, and St. Petersburg, Russia, and Fort Lauderdale, and Odessa, Ukraine, and Boulder, Colorado, and out here in Belmont. We already knew how to collaborate globally, and we had the blessing of really good tools, obviously our own stuff, to do that collaboration. So those organizations and those people had a head start. Those who weren't doing as much of that, some really did a good job of embracing the connected culture and thrived. Others are following, to a greater or lesser degree, behind the leaders in that space. And we saw a real clear difference between the two.
Gotcha. So it's interesting. I've been talking about connected society now since we first started work with the internet back in '95. Didn't really emphasize it until we got to the social media era and software became more social broadly. And then, of course, there's a ton more inside of that relative to how we've been looking at it over the years. But I hadn't really seen, even with my work around the future of work, all this talk around connected culture. But since actually reading your report, I've gone out and done further research, and it seems that SHRM and a lot of other HR departments have been talking about this for a long time. So I was just curious as to, how you discovered this kind of phrase or this movement, and if we could talk a little bit more about what connected culture really means for you guys professionally, for the business, and then about what it means for the world in the future of work.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So we've seen in this connected culture study that there's a big difference in the productivity of the employees. Remember, we've got the three structures. The employees who are doing the work are dramatically more productive. I'll look at the numbers here. 71% more connected to their colleagues versus those who are not. So what we learned from that is that it's not just about doing the job, it's the context in which you're doing your tasks and that connectivity to the teams. And then the organizations that employ those more connected people clearly thrive because they're getting more from each of the people that they're investing in.
Mm. Yeah, I was just talking with John Hagel a few weeks ago, and actually I've been talking to him for a while, but he was recently brought up this idea that he's been advancing for a while, that psychology beats strategy every time. And of course, we've been saying culture eats strategy for breakfast and all that other fun stuff. And I think that's really interesting, but I think that's what we're looking at when we talk about a work culture that's connected. Is that correct? And how would you dive into that more?
Sure. So I think that, as you look at the evolution in how people who study organizational effectiveness have evolved over time, for a long time, it was about efficiency and productivity, right? If you could eliminate a step from a task, if you could make it, a little shorter distance from the fry machine to the cash register at a McDonald's, you could increase your productivity. If you could eliminate like the TPS report from something that somebody had to do all week, they could get more stuff during the week. But I think there's an upper limit to how much sort of work you can eliminate from a role. The real productivity comes from when employees know the right things to do. They've got access to the information they need to make the right decisions. They understand the organization's priorities, and they can prioritize the work that they're doing, because every minute you spend doing the wrong thing is one less minute that you're doing the right thing, and it's one more minute making you tired. So the point of the connected culture is that if you and me and a couple other people are on the same team, and we're all working on the big Morgan project that we got to deliver, if we're connected well to each other, what we see is that flow of information that triggers an idea for you because of some offhanded comment I made about another project that gets you to the right answer, or gets you to the right answer faster, or a change in priority for the organization that gets communicated out more quickly that causes people to refocus. And we've seen this idea that these leaders, these influencers within that connected culture that lift up the whole team by their behavior, by their connection.
Oh, now you're getting into team intelligence too, and I don't want to get distracted. So let's stay focused on this stuff. And that is one of the things. There's a lot of elements to this. And when we talk about culture, of course, there's a bit of soft stuff, there's a bit of hard stuff. I don't think a lot of people really grasp it fully because it is so complex and dynamic, right?
Mm-hmm.
As I look at this and I start thinking about, well, you've been involved in the future of work for a while now and trying to advance that through your work, right? But I can't help but go back to what we were trying to accomplish in advancing social business, from 2011 to 2013 or 14. Is the connected culture essentially a better way to talk about that relative to the output of what you become? Or how do you look at this idea of connected culture in the context of the future of work and all the stuff we've been trying to accomplish for 20 plus years, really?
Yeah. Well, I think what's really interesting is I look at this from a macro level, is the convergence of these ideas, the soft, fluffy stuff, the social governance, the world would be a better place if people weren't stressed out, with the more actionable, measurable outcomes that an organization is looking to achieve. So instead of looking at the investment you make in a connected culture as being a cost of doing business because You don't want people stressed out. Organizations are realizing that there's an ROI on that investment in the same way that they've been learning about ROI on some of the other kinds of things that had previously felt soft, like, environmental contributions, like diversity and inclusion. It turns out there are real bottom line reasons to be doing these things. And organizations are now embracing those because clearly organizations are trying to thrive and improve versus their peers. And I think the connected culture is just one more piece. I liked what you said before, right? Psychology eats strategy for breakfast. Like, you get that part right, people do well.
Yeah, and of course we go back to the big finding out of Project Aristotle, the project that Google did on team productivity some time ago, where psychological safety is the number one kind of factor that goes into it. That idea of feeling free to speak, and then to your point, knowing where everyone is and what are the questions to ask and how to get things done. There's so much to it. It seems very complicated. As I'm looking at this, if I'm at a company that is struggling, where would you recommend that people start to like move towards a connected culture if they don't already kind of have it?
I think there are probably three things that I would say to whoever's leading that company. I think the first is, this is doable. It's not some vague thing that some organizations are born with and other organizations are not. And if you don't have it, you should just give up. Like, this stuff is doable. You can execute it. One of the first things that you really want to make sure is that you've got the right tools in place. If you've left your teams to sort out how they collaborate with each other, they're all inefficiently trying to solve the same problem. As an organization, if you provide those team collaboration tools, if you provide the video meeting tools, if you provide easy ways for people to collaborate with each other, they're going to be able to do that. So solve it at an organizational level. Maybe you got to run a couple experiments to figure out which tools are right for you, but solve it at an organizational level. And then the next thing, and it's pretty easy, is go out and figure out who are those collaborative leaders. Who are the people in your organization that are already naturally bringing people together? They're the ones that are putting together the Friday afternoon happy hours, or the, everybody come to work in their pajamas on Thursday, or, let's see everybody's pet. That kind of soft, fluffy stuff. And maybe you as a leader don't embrace it, but recognize that those people are doing something valuable. And then celebrate and acknowledge and reward that activity, and you'll get more of it. And your teams will start coming together, and then you get that magical increase in productivity that comes from the collaboration. You don't have to push it. You have to allow it and enable it. That makes sense?
Totally. And that brings up a whole bunch of stuff. And I'm sorry, I'm going to start with a little bit of hard one, because I want to come back to the soft stuff, particularly to talk about trust in a little bit. But I want to come back with the idea of having the tools in place, because I generally agree with you, except the challenge that I've seen, and I can't believe I'm still seeing this 27 years later after my first IT project, right? But companies will often get the tools, but not invest in the training. And so are we seeing that changing now because of this? Or because it seems to me everyone rushing to get into this in COVID, they kind of just had to get there back in March, right? And of course there was a lot of rushing then, but I'm wondering, are companies investing in the training to make sure the tools are getting the proper utilization and that people are understanding how to get the most benefit from them?
So, I think it's a mixed bag, like a lot of things. I think there are organizations out there that are much more intentional in terms of training and upskilling leaders, training and upskilling the employees, particularly those people who are now more remote, and giving them the skills that they need to do that. There are other companies that are not. I think it's going to depend a lot on your organization, but, forced to choose between train your people to do what you want them to and let them figure it out on their own, I would err on the side of let's train them to do what you want them to do.
Yeah, I would too. It surprises me how many people don't understand that. So I've been kind of always floored by that over the years. But anyways, people are different understandings and appreciations. It's why it's so hard sometimes to find the place that is right for you when looking for like a great team, and why in the Valley our teams and our friends tend to stick together and continue to work together once we've found that great group of people who we really love working with. We maintain those connections across the miles, across the years. But it still, I think, is a challenge for a lot of people who don't have that to see that it's even possible. But I actually met a bunch of people over the past several years who have never experienced a sort of negative culture, who were shocked when I told them some of the things that some of these other companies do. So anyways, I know it's out there. Let's move past talking about them. You hit on one other thing I think that was really important in here, and it was that the connected cultures also were ones that looked after the well-being of their employees. And we talk about it in terms of the ones that care about them learning how to actually use the tools. That's one element of it. But there's a lot of other stuff you found in your study. So talk to me about the impact of companies and leadership that actually cares about the well-being of their employees and their staff.
Yeah, absolutely. So as I said before, I think that the caring about somebody's well-being and the trying to build an organization that thrives and competes, those two things are coming together. Whereas before it kind of felt like that was an expense rather than an investment when you thought about that caring about humans. Some of the research that we've done, particularly around video meetings, has been really interesting in this context of work from anywhere, work from home. When this great experiment started, the biggest concern of a lot of organizations and leaders within those organizations was going to be the loss of productivity when you didn't have everybody within eyesight anymore. There was this vague sense that now that I can't see my people, they're just going to be in their pajamas at 11 in the morning and nobody's going to be doing any work. That really quickly was disproved. And I think that those leaders and organizations everywhere realized that there was no drop in productivity. In fact, what happens is that there was this spike, I think temporary, in productivity because people weren't commuting and they didn't really know what else to do with their day. So in that work-life balance trade-off, when you think about it as a zero-sum game, what suffered was the not work part. Because people got up at the same time and they started work and they worked through their lunches and they worked later in the day. And so people were doing more. And the problem has become for a lot of the organizations that we work with, it's more about managing stress than it is about managing productivity. Because that stress indirectly drops the productivity as people burn out or they're just simply being busy and not getting stuff done. They're not achieving outcomes, they're just achieving output. And we saw this in one of the studies that we are doing. We were looking at how people actually use the tools. We saw that the softer skills became really important. If you assume that everybody is doing the work they need to do, your job as a leader becomes how do you support them, as opposed to how do you crack the whip and motivate them.
Again, you've got like 8 things in there I want to get into. Everyone does it. There's so many important stuff because this is so complicated. But what I want to focus on right now really quickly is the difference between measuring activity and measuring outcomes, right? Or objective accomplishments here. Have you seen people who previously didn't trust their employees to actually be working see this sort of results, see these sorts of improvements, and actually begin to trust their people, and more importantly, begin to shift how they were measuring their success from activity basis to outcome basis?
Sure. So I'll answer that question in 2 ways. One, from our connected culture study, with these 4,000 people that we talked to, we asked them to self-report their productivity. Now, self-reporting is a little softer of a measurement than, counting up how many reports they filed or, lines of code they wrote. But we did see a dramatic difference in how people self-reported productivity between those who felt connected socially and emotionally to their organizations and those who didn't. So there's some study there. The other way I'll answer that question is quite personal, which is me. We very much on my team, which was driven by my experience as a leader, pre-COVID, we're very much about this idea that presence builds preference. And that although we're geographically distributed within each of those offices, we were a 5-day a week in the office culture. Because our relationship as designers with the product managers and the engineers and the executives is extremely important to get things done. That was our flow of information. We, like everybody else, pivoted to this work from anywhere. And we've had this diaspora of people, and we're not back in the office. In our Shaman office, we are. The other organizations are still working from anywhere. So I, as a leader, can personally say that my attitude towards that evolved. It flipped 180 degrees. We've seen the increase in productivity. We've seen and struggled with a lot of things. It's hard for a bunch of designers to whiteboard together, but we're bringing in the tools and technology that allow us to do that. So from a study standpoint, yes. And then I can say from a personal standpoint, yes as well.
Cool. One of the things that also hits me here as we're looking again at the broader arc and future of work and future of society and connected culture and what this means is that a lot of the things that are referenced here, the softer stuff, having the more social connections, caring about employee well-being and everything, are also inherent in a lot of the discussion around conscious capitalism and some kind of broader movements, right? Have you seen any correlation between the two yet? Or is it, or other correlations or ways you would characterize the leadership of the companies who have already established a great connected culture versus those who don't?
I think that it's a tough question to answer. We haven't studied that in a real quantifiable way. I can speak anecdotally about the organizations that we talk to, our customers, and how things go, and certainly what I consume in the media. I've got to be cautious, though, that there's a strong confirmation bias in that, because I, as a human being, prefer stories about how socially context, drives organizational success. So I'm going to read those and pay attention to them.
Yes.
So I hope it's true.
Yeah, I do as well, but I'm trying to really get down to, how do we, as an employee, really figure out which companies have that connected culture. I mean, obviously we can go and read Glassdoor, and there's a lot of other places we can go to, but what are we really looking for in the leadership of these connected cultures? What sort of characteristics or behaviors or things that are they doing differently?
Yeah. I think, if what you're asking is how do you evaluate an organization as you're going through that courtship process of interviewing and meeting people, I think you are going to get a sense of how well an organization does this, right? Like, how easy is it to get your meetings and things set up? How do those video conferences go? Do people feel like, they're doing a good job? Are they connecting or not? We go through in our own environment. We've been recruiting and hiring a lot as an organization since March of 2020. And we've really had to fine tune those processes to work well at a distance because we're talking to and hiring and onboarding people that haven't physically met anybody else on their team. And if we as an organization can onboard those people successfully and get them to be productive and happy and connected and successful, again, that gets back to how do we thrive versus our peers by getting the most out of everybody that's there.
Yeah, and that starts to really get into the idea of bright spots and the people who are really, thriving in this environment, and the people who are advocating for it. I think about Chris Heuer, who you may have met, and Chris is just such a vocal advocate for the remote work and the movement because it allows him to be with his family and live the sort of life and invest his time as he prefers it, right? But I'm wondering what you're seeing out of companies who are trying to promote a greater connected culture. Is there something different happening in the internal communications department as well as all this culture stuff?
It's so it's hard to speak about that in the general population out there because, by nature of the work we do, the companies that I talk to, because they're looking at or using or trying to optimize their use of the Ring Central collaboration tools, they're already in that world of we believe that building a connected culture and giving people tools is our path of success. So, my entire population of information is from orgs that are doing that and either doing it well and trying to get better or trying to figure out how to do it well.
Well, the one thing we know from it for sure is that these people, and you've even identified them in the report as remote champions, which I think is a great way to, kind of look at it. they're the ones who are advocating for it. So the people who are successful through that word of mouth in the organization and through the exemplar of their behaviors is really one of the primary ways it's being spread. And that's why I'm trying to get a broader, understanding of what different companies are doing so we can kind of spread that as well.
Mm-hmm.
But when we talk about these remote champions, what is the sort of, what do you sort of see them doing inside large organizations?
So the remote champions, and this came out of the studies, as you pointed out, is one of the things that correlates with organizations that have got a connected culture. Now, it's not clear, do organizations that promote connected culture create remote champions, or do remote champions create organizations that have a connected culture, or do they both go together? I'm not sure that really matters, because there's clear correlation between those two. And your question is starting to get into this really interesting space between economics and philosophy,
Mm-hmm.
and just overall governance on how things should go. I do believe that organizations and individuals and team managers that thrive beyond their peers tend to move the world in that direction. So if two team leads are working in the same organization and one is doing a better job of connecting her team to each other, to themselves, her team's going to thrive. And manager number two is going to look at his team and think, well, I would like to thrive as well. Maybe I can copy some of that behavior, even if it wasn't inherent in how I normally do things. And then you start to see those teams come up. That organization is going to thrive versus its peers. And other organizations are going to start to copy, or they're going to listen to podcasts like this, and they're going to think, oh, these are ways that I can do better. And that's the way this whole thing just kind of ratchets up over time. You mentioned the future of work before, and as we get back into a hybrid workspace, we're going to really see some distance between the succeeders and the non-thrivers open up.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And I'm trying to remember where I saw this the other day. And I think it was through your work. I'm just trying to make sure that I don't accidentally attribute it to you and get you stuck with it. But this idea of work from anywhere becoming work from here, is that you guys who said that? Or where did I read that recently?
Yeah, we certainly think about this hybrid workforce as being where we're going. Right? This is, in the great Wayne Gretzky speak, the puck is going to be in this hybrid workforce. The thing about work from anywhere, when everybody got sent home, is everybody got sent home, or at least, within this knowledge worker population that we're talking about. Lots and lots of people in the world don't have the privilege of being able to move their job to their living room. But it was a reasonably level playing field for the organization. Everybody was not in the office. Where this is going to get very interesting is this hybrid workforce, where some people are going to return to the office. It's going to become safe to be close to each other again. Offices are going to become safe. Organizations are going to put good practices in place to keep their employees safe. Some are going to return to the office. But as we talked about at the opening of this, the bell has been rung on work from anywhere, work from home. Some people in some organizations, let's just call it half the people and half the organizations to make the conversation easy, are not going to be back in the office. They're going to be caring for a parent. They're going to be caring for an elementary school age child. They're not going to want to do their commute anymore. They're just going to be remote. So now the question becomes, for all of the participants, the employee, the team lead, the organization, how do you thrive in a hybrid world? Because it's not a level playing field anymore. So now you, as an employee, if you're home and your peers are in the office, they have an advantage over you because they've got much easier lines of communication and collaboration. So it becomes incumbent on you to stay connected. The team lead who's managing that hybrid world has got a responsibility to get the most out of everybody, because you can't get 100% out of some of your people and 50% out of some and thrive as a leader. And then the organizations have got to figure that out. So Ring Central, we really think a lot about how do the tools you use at work, like the conference room, big TV where you have the meeting, how do we connect that to the people who are at home in a way that allows everybody to bring their full, authentic, 100% contribution? And if we do a good job of that, our customers will outperform their peers. Their peers will then look and say, what tools are you using? Oh, Ring Central. And then they'll go get themselves some Ring Central so they can all thrive. And that becomes our approach.
Yeah, you get into something else that was interesting from the report that I want to dive deeper in. I had thought about saying, is there anything surprising that came out of the report? But at the beginning, but I know what the surprising thing is. I think, and that's the next thing, which is the caretakers. So, what can you tell me more about what you found about caretakers?
There was an interesting thing as we looked at people's satisfaction and productivity. And one of the things is that we saw people who saw themselves in a caretaker role reporting better well-being and better productivity. That might have, it's one of those things where once you look at it, it completely makes sense, but it's not something that we saw coming. So if you think about somebody who's got a split responsibility as a caretaker, if they're at home and everybody else now goes home, they're in a level playing field with their peers that they might not have had before. And then when you bring in tools that are a big part of the connected culture, remember, connected culture is about how people behave, plus the tools that an organization provides to their workers. So think about a tool like Ring Central Glip that allows you to do team messaging and video conferencing in a single product. If you're a caretaker, let's just say you've got an elementary school age kid that you've got to get into a meeting and you're now the IT support and everything else, you may not be able to participate in real time in a video meeting with your team. When you take that video meeting and the team messaging together, so that when the video meeting's over, the discussion about the meeting and the meeting artifacts are posted out into a team, you as a caretaker can now catch up in a time-shifted sort of way. You're not at a disadvantage anymore. So your productivity is better and your satisfaction is better because you're able to take care of the things you need to whilst not being left behind at work, which is an amazing, magical thing to happen for everybody, the org, the individual, the team leader.
So is Glip sort of like a TiVo for remote meetings or virtual meetings?
I haven't heard that before, but I really like that model because the point of the magic of the TiVo, of course, was time shifting. You didn't have to sit down in front of the TV at 8 o'clock to watch The Sopranos. You could go watch it the next day, or you could binge it over the weekend. That combination of real time and time shifted, what we call store and forward, is the magic of a product like Glip. Because that real time meeting is very valuable, very high bandwidth. The conversation that we're having right now, it's very different from sending emails back and forth. But you, just to extend this example, when you're done, you're going to break down this real-time live conversation we have into artifacts that can then be forwarded and stored someplace else for somebody to retrieve and consume in the future. So somebody who wasn't here right now as we're speaking gets the value of the conversation right now as they're listening to it in the future. So yeah, I like that TiVo idea. I'm going to use that. Thank you.
Cool. I'm also gonna go a little deeper into the weeds, if you will, of some UX and some other issues on this point because it's something I've been looking at for a while. First of all, level playing field. We've got to talk more about it. I encourage everyone to look at the interview we did with David Burkus that just got put up to the site a couple of weeks ago, where he talks about the key to a level playing field, because one of the greatest concerns I have, and this is also between, as we've been very careful to talk about the relatively good fortune of knowledge workers who have been blessed to be able to work from home versus the people working the front lines who have to continue to go out every day, right? That we don't lead into a caste society. And one of the challenges from our past efforts at collaboration was when everyone was in the room except for the 3 people who possibly caretakers who had to be at home looking after their family or child or whatever that is family or whatever it might be, that they had diminished power and they had diminished career opportunities. So that is one of the real big concerns as we get back to a hybrid work environment, that the people who are in the headquarters are not treated vastly differently than the people who are working from home, and that we find a way to make equality. And just to get to the last point, because I think it's important to share with the audience right now, David Burkus, his suggestion is actually that even if people are in headquarters and in the office, that everyone still meets virtually from their screens instead of getting together in a meeting room. I don't think that's going to happen widely, but I think it's a really fascinating idea that I'm looking forward to seeing the data behind. And so I'm wondering if you've thought about that specific issue at all relative to how do we create that level playing field when we've got 8 people in a room and 3 people remote, or any of the other ways that we can actually ensure or build into the product ways that allows or encourages, rather, that's probably a better word, everyone to participate and be heard.
Mm-hmm. So
Is there something in the product for that?
You are hitting on the thing that I worry about most 24 hours a day, which is that future, that hybrid workforce. And again, keeping in mind that mental model of organizations, leaders within those organizations, and employees, there's impact on all 3 of those. So you've talked about the worker who is remote and has got a team that's on site, and the disadvantage that worker has got. One way to solve that would be to handicap everybody in the building by sending them to their desks and forcing them to pretend they were remote. I don't know what the future is going to look like, but my immediate concern with that is that as an organization, you've now taken away one of your big means of competing, which is people collaborating in real time on a whiteboard or something else, just trying to level the playing field. So I like leveling the playing field, but I think from an org level, you may be less competitive on that. So then it starts to become a question of, can you bring those remote people into that real-time conversation in the room with, it's going to be tools that are doing that. So on our own team, we're still all remote, but we've been doing a lot of real-time collaboration with tools that allow us to do virtual whiteboarding and virtual Post-it note moving around and multiple people in the same documents at the same time. Some are on the phone, some are in a video conference, some are just looking at the document. That's allowing us to explore those things and see how they work. Now, from a tool standpoint and the tools that we sell, we have products that allow collaboration in the office and collaboration at a distance. To me, the answer gets back to your TiVo thing, right? Can I bring that technology to bear so that those people who are remote don't have that disadvantage? And that's going to avoid the dystopian idea that those people now start to become gig workers and are somehow less than others, right? From an employee standpoint, I would point out to an individual who's in an organization where maybe they are not able to compete or thrive, and point out that there are a lot of organizations out there that don't have that issue. So, in our world of designers, there are any number of agency models that have got very distributed global teams, where there's an office that you've got your accounting and your HR functions and your IT and the people who have to be close to each other, but a large portion of the population is dispersed on a level playing field. And some organizations are going to do well, some aren't. Go find the ones that are. Like, if you're going to be a caretaker, don't try to be the best caretaker at your current job. Go find a job that's doing it well. And then that way everybody gets a chance to optimize their well-being.
Yeah, and of course, that's one of the first advantages. I worked on one of my first client projects with my agency was actually a job site back in the early days of Monster that was trying to compete with Monster. And so, that's one of the great advantages of the internet. And now that we've seen that people can work from anywhere and they don't have to be living in your hometown, that creates a great opportunity for hiring managers to actually bring in the best talent and not be restricted to the best talent that's within a drive of the HQ or that's worthwhile to shift out here. But inside of what you're just saying, which I largely agree with, there is one assumption that I want to challenge with you for a second, and I don't know the answer to it, but I do want to challenge it for the purpose of discussion, and that's that in-person collaboration is better because of the energy of the individuals in person. Now, I understand why that's true now, because that's more of the norm. That's what we've been doing for a long time. But isn't it really your goal as a UX designer of this sort of collaboration product to make this virtual collaboration or remote collaboration or whatever other modifying phrase you want to put on it more valuable and more productive? And do you see a time where it will be And when might that actually happen?
So
That's a lot of
I think
sorry.
like all good and interesting questions, the answer is some variation on it depends. So
Yes.
I think it depends on the kind of collaboration. If three people have a job to diagnose and repair problems with a jet engine, they're not going to be able to do that remotely. The three of them are going to need to be standing on a step ladder by the jet engine with a bunch of hard tools in their hands, monkeying around and doing stuff. That kind of collaboration has to happen live and in person in that particular site. You know, at the other end of the spectrum of collaboration, you've got a writer and an editor. And the novelist writing the book never has to be in the same room as the editor, because they're going to create work product which is then sent someplace else, that's going to be worked on and then sent back. And then I think everything else is in between that someplace. So, you know, near and dear to my heart are designers collaborating with each other. The designers on my team are working with largely theoretical ideas. You can talk about them, you can draw them on a Post-it note or in a tool and share them with everybody else. And it works pretty well remotely. A team of architects working on something that requires a 3D model is going to be somewhere in the middle, right? Because you're going to have tools you can use, but there also is no substitute for standing there with a physical object. So now you start to get into a little of that disparity. Our role as an organization for those use cases that we can address is to bring those tools to bear that allow an organization to get everything it can out of everybody, remote or on site, or in that hybrid space. So we focus on the things that we can. Like, we're not going to solve the jet engine problem, but maybe I can solve the problem of a remote training. Or maybe I can solve the problem of a marketing team that's writing a press release that three people need to collaborate on. And then if we can do that, then we're doing a good thing for the employee, the leader of the PR team, and then of course the organization.
Yeah, it's I agree with you. It's definitely contextually relevant to what type of work we're trying to accomplish and all that. But I'm wondering if we have to wait another 5 to 7 years until we have GLIP AR, where we're actually looking at people next to us instead. And if we really need to get the technology back to that point where virtual presence is really more ambient virtual presence instead, right? Anyways, I'm hopeful that we find the way sooner. So I'm cheering you on from the sidelines here.
Oh, thank you.
One of the things inherent in all of this stuff that we've kind of hit upon, and I want to kind of point out and talk to you a little more about, is that it seems to me that to be successful, to have a connected organization, to have the connected culture that creates a thriving environment where employees are happier and healthier, where they're more productive, where you're not only doing more, but you're actually accomplishing more of the objectives you set out to do, really comes down to a bunch of different things, but it has to start with something that I've been talking about. I know a lot of other people have been talking about it too, but around mindful work, around being more intentional about this, about not being so reactive, about being able to be reflective, about being able to be intentional about what we're doing. And I'm wondering what sort of things you've been seeing around that when it comes to products and how we can help through these tools to facilitate more mindful work instead of the reactive sort of immediate outrage that we've been triggered by for the last several years, unfortunately.
So it's a really good question and a really good point to bring up. I absolutely agree with you about this idea of mindful work. In the design world, we talk about meeting time and maker time. And meeting time are the tasks that you need to do that start when the big hand is pointing straight up, and then they end the next time the big hand's pointing straight up, which is all very arbitrary. Maker time is a lot fuzzier. Maker time is really lumpy in terms of, if you drew a graph of like how much value over time, you know, there's a whole bunch of no value time and there's some high value time, and it kind of goes up and down, and it begins and ends at arbitrary times. And you need to protect your maker time, that mindfulness time, from the meeting time. So when we design products, if we're going to make a product that's going to deliver a barrage of messages at you, that product needs a way to turn that off to allow for the maker time. So a do not disturb mode, or we're working on a new focus mode, which would let you and me and a couple other people that we're collaborating with to shut out the rest of the world to protect not just our time, but our time as a bubble, our time as a group of people who are collaborating together. And then bringing in the tools, because also part of that mindfulness, it overlaps onto that social and emotional connection as well. Mindfulness isn't just meditating in a cave on top of a mountain by yourself. Mindfulness has also got that community part that's part of it, where you're connected and you're part of that community. So how do we as product designers create ways to allow you and I to stay connected as we're doing the work that we're doing, whether we're on site or remote?
Well, I think one of the ways that we all need right now is cameras that are embedded inside of our screens.
Mm-hmm. So that you can
You
make
know,
eye contact rather than looking like you're looking off into space. Yes.
yes. Well, media training. I've taught a long time ago. Look in the camera, and
Mm-hmm.
so while I'm looking in the camera, I'm looking at my notes. I'm trying to occasionally search for something to make sure I reference the right thing,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm still trying to look at you occasionally to make sure we're connected. But I'd
Yeah.
rather be looking at you as if I was talking to you. And I know there's a bunch
Mm-hmm.
of things people. I actually tried to put a camera on the tripod in front of the screen. That didn't work. So, anyways, I'd love for seeing you keep working on that component of it too, because, anyways, it's just a real pet peeve of mine, if you will, on it. We talked a lot about the things that are great about connected cultures and the behaviors that we see inside of them. There's also, of course, the people who aren't doing so well, who aren't in the connected cultures. I'd be remiss if we didn't just hit on it for a minute or two here before we wrap up. And it seems that I mean, we found out it's a hard topic to bring up, right? As we discussed
Mm-hmm.
over the emails over the last couple of weeks. And it's a real concern for me and for a lot of my colleagues that women are disproportionately affected right now, and in many ways not doing as well and not doing as productive. And in fact, we've actually seen a lot of people leave the workforce, a lot of women leave the workforce. I'm wondering what you could tell me about that situation and what some of the brighter side is of that, kind of sad story here. Because I know you have a brighter side.
Yes. Well, I think that we did see in this study, and I've seen it in other studies, that disproportionately women versus men are not thriving in the work from home space. Um, there are a couple of clear things that go on, and these are broad generalizations. So, we'll try to limit the number of email that we get on this, but in broadly general ways, it seems clear that in the work from home space, if there's a good place to work from home and then not as good place to work from home, that women end up with the dining room table and men end up with the spare bedroom. Women have clearly inherited the greater share of setting up the Zoom meetings with their kids in school and doing all of those things. We've seen also with minorities, with people who struggle with English as a first language, they also struggle in that disconnected world as well. I think that the the good news is that people are recognizing that, which means that people are thinking about it and trying to find ways around it. And then circling back to that little piece of sunshine, that piece about the caretaker that came out. Um, the in the best of all possible worlds, the tools that we bring to these connected cultures are going to level the playing field between people who need to care for somebody else or who've got a less optimal working environment. And that's really where we want to focus. So if we can bring in, like, let's take virtual backgrounds. One of my favorite features, it's got pluses and minuses. I'll talk about what I like about virtual backgrounds, which are that if your work from home environment is not as nice as somebody else's, a virtual background can cover up a bunch of baby toys in the background or dirty dishes in the sink, or the fact that your apartment's a little smaller and shabbier than the other person you're collaborating with. That's a great field leveler that could go out there. Your TiVo comment, that ability to store and forward content to a time when a caretaker needs to get a hold of it, I think is also going to help in that space.
Yeah, oh, anyways, it just some of the stuff obviously over the past couple of years just makes me sad, but I still have hope. I definitely have more hope this week, so that's a good thing. And I'm looking forward to what is possible in this year ahead. I want to reflect back on one point before we get to start wrapping things up here, which is something that we've been talking about a lot, and I'd love your take on this as well, because particularly as we look at the idea of, and as you referenced in your particular anecdote that was made up, but also based on some truth, obviously, that oftentimes the man gets the extra room and the wife ends up at the table in front of everyone. I actually tried to do the opposite of that with my wife, and she won't let me. So there's also the interpersonal dynamic there. It's not just a macro issue where I'm like, no, you need your own office. But I really do want to point out that, like, the difference there between thriving and really struggling is the boundary that's created. And that's why actually we've been focused not so much on work-life balance, but on what we've been calling life-work boundary management. And the reason why I want to get in this and set it up in that way is that when we were talking the other day, we were talking about the social signaling of persistent presence and how we could actually see each other throughout the day and know that we're still together even though we're not in the same physical space. This new idea that's out there that's been the skeuomorphic approach to virtual HQs and rooms that's taking itself up. And of course, just even the idea, I mean, going back to IBM and Same Time, just being available on Same Time to chat or on any chat product, Slack, or etc. But I know that also requires a lot of attention energy for many people, or at least they feel like people are looking at them all the time. They feel self-conscious and they can't do it. So I'm wondering how you have been thinking about, kind of managing some of these boundaries and helping people to manage these boundaries so they don't get to that point of fatigue or screen fatigue, really more broadly.
So I think there's a lot in there to unpack, and let's start with that idea of work-life balance. Absolutely agree with you. I've never liked the idea of work-life balance because it implies a zero-sum game between the two. And as long as you're in a zero-sum game, you can't get any better. I think that you talked about the boundaries. We talk about this idea of work-life integration, particularly in a globally connected, and again, we're talking about knowledge workers here with the blessing to be able to work remotely. There is something happening in my world 24/7, just by the way offices are spread around the globe. I can't structure my day to be an 8-hour block of time that begins and ends. It doesn't matter where I put that 8-hour block of time, it's not going to work. So I need to let work, just speaking personally, impede upon non-work time and allow the non-work time to impede on the work. And when I can optimize that full cycle, I get more than just the zero-sum game. So, just again, speaking anecdotally for myself, I can go to Safeway in the afternoon, which is a great help to the family. And sometimes I'm on a call at 9 o'clock at night, which is a detriment. But all in all, both family and work are thriving. So that's the first part. The second part gets back into the tools. How do the tools allow people to get that psychological break while still maintaining the social connection? So you and I spoke about, the always on meeting, the idea that there's, I've got it off now for the conversation here, but I've got a group of people that I collaborate with that spend a certain amount of their time just sitting on one of my monitors, not doing anything except being there and nurturing that social connection. That's really different from looking at a 4x4 grid of people all staring at you in a meeting, which gets to be tiring, and allowing people to optimize those things so that if it's stressful for you, you can do something else. If it's nurturing for you, you can approach that as you move between those different modes: text, store, and forward, setting up a meeting, doing a live meeting. Those integrated products are really important.
Yeah, and I agree with you broadly, but I'm looking at things like Germany's new remote policy, and I haven't gotten too deep in Russia's, but Ireland just came out with the whole remote work policy and governance that they're putting on. And my concern on some of that stuff, and I realize you can't talk about it because of the corporate stuff, so I don't mean for you to, but My concern for that is that people are still stuck in the 8-hour block day. Whereas I see us even going forward that it could be a 3-2-3 day in terms of how I structure my day. And the key is, when are the rest of my team members available? What time zones are they in? And how we think about this globally. So I'm just concerned, like in the early days of the internet, where they were implementing a lot of new rules on society, new regulations on society that were based on the way things were, instead of embracing how they might be. So anyways, there's just some tensions that are going to rise there, and I'm really fascinated, and I'll keep paying attention to how you're able to like either adapt, build that in the product, or do what's best for the individuals. No need to comment on that necessarily. But what I do want to get to here in the last minutes is we've talked a lot about the study. I've got the link out there. Of course, you can find it through Ring Central. And if you look through the search for it, I've also posted it in our post and in the live stream on Facebook and YouTube. So you can find it there, and it'll be in the wrap-up post. But is there anything we didn't hit upon from the study that you really think is important for us to call out? Or any other thoughts you want to share here as we move towards closing?
I think tangentially relevant to your last point that you're making, and then circling back on the study, I think that we don't know what the rules are going to be tomorrow, next month, 6 months from now, any more than we knew what July was going to look like in January of 2020. We can just try to get a little bit better all of the time, but new things are going to happen, which requires experimentation and ongoing learning. So one thing I know for sure, a year from now, someone's going to look back on this conversation and the stuff that you and I have been talking about, and they're going to think, wow, those two were pretty naive, or they sure missed this. Like, I don't know what it is, but there's something in here which just makes no sense at all once we go out into the future. I would encourage those listening, as team leaders, as organizational leaders, as individual employees, to experiment. So you mentioned the GLIP product. Ring Central has got a great free messaging and meeting product that has got enough scale in the free version that a lot of people aren't going to need any more than that. You don't know how to use it. You don't know how it's going to help. Go figure it out. Play around with it. Try it. Click on stuff. Start a meeting. Start a little team conversation and see how the meeting and the team conversation work together. If it does something for you, great. You've got a whole new way of thriving. If it doesn't, you lost a few minutes. So go get yourself some GLIP. And then, as you were talking about before, like, think about your role and where you are in the office, out of the office. And are you thriving? Are you contributing? Are you leading your teams in the best possible way you can? Because those who do are going to continue to thrive. And, this is hard. It's supposed to be hard, because that's how some thrive and some don't. And I just encourage your listeners, like, be on the side of thriving.
I like that. I like that suggestion, and try to embrace it as much as possible, despite which healthcare providers associate that brand identity with themselves. Really, Michael, this has been a fabulous conversation. I'm so happy for the chance to get to know you a little bit better and learn more about what you've been doing with Ring Central and learn about GLIP. But these sorts of insights are really important to share, and I'm so grateful for you sharing your time with us and with everyone else, to share what you've learned and to help people thrive in their workplaces. So thank you for coming and joining us today.
Thank you for the opportunity. It's been terrific.
And everyone else who joined us, thank you. It's a pleasure to get a chance to do this. And I'm looking forward to helping you figure out how to help us make remote work for everyone. This is Chris Heuer for Remotely. Have a great day and a better weekend ahead. Cheers. Take care, Michael.